Welcome to Inside the GMAT, the official podcast of GMAC. I'm your host, Zach. Today, we're diving into a topic that's on everyone's mind, the role of AI in MBA admissions, and more importantly, what AI can never replace. At the heart of every strong application is something technology cannot generate, no matter how good your prompt, your authentic story. We've talked before about using AI in your applications back in season 4, so if you missed that episode, go and check it out. But as AI evolves and applicants become more sophisticated in how they use it, I wanted to revisit the topic. It's important, and because while AI can help polish your materials, maybe, there's one thing it definitely cannot replicate. So to continue exploring how applicants can uncover and share that story, I'm joined by Susan Berishaj, founder and CEO of Sia Admissions. Susan has guided countless candidates through the application process, helping them move beyond surface-level answers to reveal the introspection and self-awareness that truly resonates with admissions committees. Susan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic as we're seeing more and more engagement with AI. And I think it's such an important topic. And also, thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly.
As somebody who also has a somewhat complicated last name, it's very important to me to get the names right.
Yes, absolutely.
So I did a conversation about AI a little bit ago, but I almost feel like some of that conversation is outdated because even in the span of like half a year, I feel like the technology has changed, become even more impressive, maybe a little bit more scary in some regards. So I'm really excited to get into it. But before we do that, Susan, I was hoping if you could share a little bit about your background and what inspired you to start Sia Admissions.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. So I am an alumnus of NYU and Yale, so I personally have walked this journey. But what was a turning point for me, and I will also say that while I walked the journey myself and applying to and gaining admission to some of the top institutions, I did it on my own, and I didn't really know that the world of MBA admission space or just admission space was really available. The turning point for me was when a colleague actually approached me who had signed up to work with a big name admission consulting firm. And the coach that she particularly was working with, she felt that she wasn't really heard and was looking for another opinion. Now, my background is in English lit and history, and I love storytelling. It's what I live for. And I was really excited to read her materials. So, as context, she was applying to multiple schools, but her focus was really HBS because that was her dream institution. So, being from the Balkans that I am, I'm a straight shooter. So, I read her application and her essays essentially, and they sounded like essentially that they lacked personality, they lacked perspective. It was a regurgitation of or perhaps even a more in-depth perspective of what was already on her resume. But what was really lacking was her journey, what motivates her, what makes her tick, what were the things that she had lived through that inspires her to do what she wanted to do and the reason why she was applying to HBS. So, in the process of us working together, I've always been someone who really enjoys supporting others. And, telling a story is something, again, that I really care about. So, in the process of 13 different drafts, we uncovered her authentic story. She became vulnerable in the context of, you know, she was a Korean first generation American, like living first generation living in America. And we really talked about the dichotomy of that experience where in her traditional background and her family background, she was supposed to live a certain way. She was supposed to fill a certain role. Yet she was in America having exposure to other areas that were considered sort of the men's world because she was in private equity. And she talked about that dichotomy, and we were able to communicate that effectively that she only actually got admitted to HBS and she applied to 6 other schools. And this experience was really a catalyst for me in terms of what led me to found Sia Admissions. I wanted to build a firm that elevates applicants' voices and not just thinking of them as sort of another sort of item on a machine of template building applications. So, but beyond that, what I see the work that we do here at Sia Admissions is helping that next generation of leaders who are going to be influencing industries, who are going to be influencing policy, global markets. And I see us playing a role there in helping those strong applicants access the best resources possible for them to then position them for the success that they are bound to have if they're placed in an environment that allows them to thrive. And that, for me, is really important. Recognizing that not everyone belongs at Harvard, not everyone belongs at Stanford, not everyone belongs at Wharton, but everyone has a place somewhere that enables them to show their best selves and leverage and lean on a community that will support them to get to the vision that they have for their future.
I feel like you're touching on some of the biggest takeaways that folks should have when they approach the admissions process. So I'm actually curious, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that candidates have about the whole process?
I think applicants think, I know we are in the GMAC world, but applicants actually do think that it is their GPA, their GMAT or their GRE score, and the brand of the institutions that they're coming from that determines if they get in or not. But actually, what the admission team is looking beyond that. They have a lot of McKinsey applicants. They have a lot of Deloitte applicants, a lot of Goldman Sachs applicants, a lot of Meta applicants. What differentiates one from the next, right? The admission team's responsibility is for them to find individuals who have really clear vision, demonstrate resilience, have curiosity to learn, are coachable, are teachable, and have adaptability and conviction to leave their stamp in the world. The other thing that they're looking for is really for authenticity and signaling that you have the maturity to be here, to take advantage of every single resource that the business school has to offer, and that you are going to not waste that opportunity, but rather you're going to lean on it and be able to move to the next level in your career. But even more important is that they're looking for fit. Fit, I know it's oftentimes thought of as this sort of nebulous concept. No one knows what actually fit means. And you know, personally, I'm sure all of you, Zach, and I know, and I'm sure others who are watching know when you feel like you belong in a room. And that is not going to come from you reading blogs, looking at the school's website. You have to engage with the people that are going to be your future peers to really sense if you belong in that community.
So when you're reading an application, though, maybe not being physically in the room, how can you tell if a candidate is being authentic?
Authentic candidates are absolutely willing to reveal depths of experiences and sometimes even vulnerable moments in their life. Now, not every school, I will say, put a caveat here, not every school allows you to do that in your application, but the authenticity comes in the way you talk about your goals, and every single school allows you to do that. That's part of the application. You have a place to talk about what matters to you, why it matters to you. Even if you mention, I want to join the retail club, the energy club. It's not just about joining the club. It's about communicating how you think, how you see its value, what matters to you, how you're going to engage. And all of that has to come from internal reflection that obviously requires time and introspection. In terms of people who are checking boxes, right? One of the things that is very evident I mean, I always say we are small potatoes in the context of what the admission team sees in an application year, how many applicants they see versus how many we see. And even we see a lot of applicants who rely so heavily on buzzwords, generic goals, that perfect narrative that's not really true. In the goals perspective, I hear oftentimes is like, oh yeah, my friend told me that I should do consulting. That's really not a reflective thinking in terms of what you want to say to the admission team, right? You need to really build it out. And then on the other side, that perfect narrative. If you were perfect, if you were the CEO, COO, CSO that you aspire to be, you wouldn't need an MBA. So tell us where you are, be authentic to where your strengths are. And oftentimes people have, that is one of the hardest questions that they have to answer. What is your strengths? What makes you unique? What do people come to you for? And then tell us also, well, have you thought about the future? What does that future you need in order for that future to become a reality? And you then have to dive into what you're missing and speaking to that. Outside of that, inauthenticity comes from when applicants or an application or what you say in your application, in your resume, in your essays, in your short answer questions, when it sounds very much like your peer who does a similar job sitting at the cubicle next to you or across from you. If that is the case, if you two are talking about the same things, you haven't done your job.
AI tools are everywhere right now for every possible function, need, want. And applicants, of course, are naturally curious about how to use them, but there's also some risk, right, in leaning too heavily on them. How are you seeing folks applying to business school using AI in the application process right now?
So that is an excellent question and something that definitely keeps me up at night. What I'm seeing applicants, or the way I'm seeing applicants use AI, is thinking about, essentially prompting AI to tell a story that they have thought about very briefly, or they think this is a story that admission team is going to like. So AI, generate a response to this question with this example, which is going to obviously give you a very polished response. But obviously what that does is it also loses, the soul of you. When you work with AI, its job is to give you a response. It doesn't care if the response is right or not. It's just going to give you a response. And sometimes, especially if you don't have a trained eye, you are going to say things that may not make you look in the best light. So AI is not going to create discernment. That's your job, the applicant's job, to determine what goes in and what doesn't go. More important than that, what I am noticing is applicants are outsourcing their critical thinking to AI. They're saying, AI, think for me, instead of using it as a supporting tool, which is what it's there to be used for. And I'm totally for AI. I think AI has made our jobs much, much easier. However, your job is to really be able to communicate your critical thinking and use your examples as illustrators of that critical thinking in action. So if you let AI tell you what you should think, that is a major disservice to your future. So I would say that those are the two main areas where I find applicants are erroneously using AI in their application that doesn't really get them to where they want to go. Because when they apply, they think, oh, I've done a good job, right? I've written a polished essay. But the outcomes are not going to be as pleasing as they hope it will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more about this idea that we're sort of outsourcing our critical thinking. It's actually why, like, I apologize to sound like a GMAC employee, but it's actually why I think the GMAT is so crucial, maybe the most crucial it's ever been in this application process in its 50 plus years of existence, because it really does measure those critical thinking skills. But also, I want to unpack something that you said because I think it's really interesting, this idea of something not having a soul. And I suppose at first listen, that could sound like something that's maybe a little woo-woo or even esoteric or artsy. I don't know, give it whatever word you want. But can you unpack what it means for like an essay or a whole application package to not have a soul? What makes a soul in
Yeah.
this regard?
That is a very deep question, a very deep philosophical question, what makes a soul? And there's plenty of books that speak to that. But in the context of the application, I would say a soul, an application that lacks soul is one that is essentially just regurgitating facts. So I did this, then I did this, then I did this other thing. It doesn't give us any perspective that we should be taking. It just walks us through, in the simplest way, it just walks us through a journey. Yes, you've told the story. You check that box. You gave an example. You check that box. However, a soul, an essay that has soul, it has um, texture. We feel what you feel. Like we as a reader feel what you want us to feel. Integrates nuance. It speaks about vulnerability. And in order for someone to be able to capture soul, the soul of a story, they have to integrate critical thinking into that piece of work that they're producing. And that is having the ability to evaluate what matters, evaluate what experiences mean, give it meaning for the reader. What should we take? What should we make out of this? Don't let the admission team determine what they think they should make out of it, right? It is your job to tell us, to tell your story. Don't leave, your story to be told by someone else. And the other piece that oftentimes is lacks in the soul is lacks in an essay that lacks soul is not being able to communicate not just the meaning of the story, but why does it matter? You had an experience? Great. Why should the admission team care? What does your experience bring to the peer group in the various different spaces in terms of how you're going to contribute? So whether that experience is about leadership and you were able to communicate how you make decisions. So I have a story of a client who was a military candidate and he was working in his Wharton applications, a second application that literally asks, what are you going to contribute to the classroom, your community at Wharton? And this experience actually came out as a result of many different conversations because they didn't really see a lot of value in it initially. So this was a military applicant who was deployed on a mission with a team, and their mission was to make sure that if they were on a ship, making sure that any helicopter or any aircraft that is landing, an emergency landing, that they had all the requisite sort of training to be able to make sure that it lands without casualties, without damage to the equipment and everything else. Now, this was a leader who's done many different amazing things that we as civilians can't really even imagine what their experiences are like. But in this situation, essentially, the probability of an aircraft landing, having an emergency landing in the middle of the ocean, it's very low. And his teammates were essentially complaining that they didn't want to do all the drills that were required of them. And what he did here, he essentially looked at the future. What if that really small probability were to happen? How would everyone feel? If there was a casualty, if there was something that happened as a result of them not training. So essentially, he went against all of his peers and said, no, we're actually going to do every single training and we're going to be prepared for the worst and expect the best. And what happened in that deployment, actually, there was an emergency landing and they were able to, land it without any casualties and without any damage. And what this showed is not just, of course, an amazing story that I remember still today. But it demonstrates what it takes to be a leader, that when you have a conviction that to do the right thing, sometimes you will go against the grain, but having that ability to, stand up for what you believe in and do the hard work that is necessary is really what makes someone a strong leader. And we leaned on this story to tell Wharton that specific character trait of his. So we could have said, "Oh, I'm a leader. I'm going to show up to Wharton and do all these experiences as a leader." But here is a live, almost live, a snippet into his life that the reader got to experience because he was sharing all the minutia details that were necessary for this story to be cohesive enough for someone who is not in the military to understand and interpreted in the way they wanted them to read the essay, that showcases soul in the context of who they are and what are their intrinsic values that they will continue to bring to Wharton. And this person got into Wharton and other schools, but the ability to do that and to be able to stick to the story and give enough context, give enough detail, be vulnerable, and um, also share the meaning behind it is, I think, what brings soul to the picture.
Yeah. I love that story. And what I love most about it, as religious listeners of this podcast know, my background's in theater. And the thing that makes a story compelling is tension and
Mhm.
stakes. And no matter what you do, AI is not going to give you tension or stakes. It is
Right.
so conflict averse, it's not even funny. So to rely on a tool that cannot see the value of drama or disagreement or conflict is a huge disservice. That all being said, do you think that there is a healthy or responsible way for applicants to use AI in their process without sort of losing their voice, their story, their soul, whatever word you want to use for authenticity?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, I think AI is an excellent tool and it should be used as a tool. So think of AI as like a research assistant, a brainstorming partner to organize your thoughts, to, sort of give you a little bit of structure as you're navigating this process. What I think it's important to remember in the context of using AI responsibly is making sure that there are guardrails. Yes, AI can support you, but the heavy lifting has to come from you. And I know all of you applicants who are watching most of you are still studying for the GMAT. You have a full-time job. You have a lot of other commitments beyond the application. And what the AI has done at this moment is said, oh, I can do a lot more things faster, which is great. But the thinking, the reflection, the critical thinking, the meaning making needs time for you to actually reflect on, continue to develop. And that's something that you should never give that privilege to AI.
Susan, when we first met, you said that the most successful applicants are the ones who know themselves best. And I want to dig into that more because I think this process is so rife with competition that it is so difficult sometimes to just think about yourself because you're thinking about everybody else who's in the same position you're in. So why do you think introspection, why do you think knowing yourself as best as possible, and I know that that's a hard thing to do, why do you think that's so powerful as a differentiator in the MBA application?
Well, I think knowing yourself, it comes with knowing what matters to you. And that's really important. So, what introspection does, it actually helps you go beyond what happened, right? What are the events that you may have influenced, or there are other forces that are influencing those events? So, it moves you from that into you having the ability to look at that from a bird's eye view and say, okay, this happened, but why does it matter? Right? Why does it matter for me in terms of how did I develop as a leader? Why does it matter for the community that I'm in, whether that's an extracurricular community, whether that is your work community, your peer groups, your boss, the company that you're working at, and also why does it matter for your future? You don't have the space to write your entire life story. And if you don't know to first and foremost assess what experiences you've had and then discern which ones are the ones that matter most, no AI tool is going to give you that. You have to make those calls. You have to have a repository of experiences and then decide from there, what are the ones that matter the most to you from a core value basis, first and foremost. And then, of course, from a business perspective, from an MBA admissions perspective, what do they care about? Because you are balancing a lot. And like you said, we work in the context of, applicants who are high achievers. And we equate our internal value with the successes that we have. And we are constantly comparing our successes to the next person, whether that is a peer in the same level, okay, they got to the next level and I didn't, or whether it's someone who we are aspiring to be and we're not there yet. That is something that we do naturally. And, we can't sit here and say that just doesn't happen, because it does. But it's not about saying, oh, well, I'm just going to keep comparing myself. It's about really thinking internally, what matters to me. What this introspection does also, it actually reminds you about your milestones. This is something I occasionally do. I read my Yale application. I spent over 6 months on that application to put it together. And I honestly don't think about my past experiences very often. I'm always looking for the next thing that we're looking to do towards. And I know all the clients I work with do the same thing. So what this application process forces applicants to do is to say, okay, take stock of what your experiences have been. And that doesn't happen through AI. It happens by you thinking through methodically through your experiences. What are pivotal moments in those experiences and why? First and foremost, what are the pivotal moments in your experiences in different stages of your life? Why are they important? So that's something you have to give yourself space to do. And from our experience as a admission coaching firm, one of the first things we have our clients do is actually go through that introspection process. And every single client I work with, they have like about a week or so to complete this introspection workbook because it's a lot of questions. But even though they have a lot of questions in the process of working together, we uncover different experiences that they never told us about because they forgot. So you can't expect yourself to be able to sit one time and do this introspective work and say, all of my experiences are here. Sometimes you have to ask your friends, tell me about me. What do we do in this scenario? Your parents play a huge role in this introspection because they will remind you of situation that you have filed away and have forgotten all about it. And then from there, obviously, your differentiation comes from being able to piece those pieces together into a coherent story that speaks about who you are. Your life experiences, your background is actually extremely valuable in the context of your application. We've had clients that we worked with where their entire goal was based on a single event that happened in their life. I had this client who was a consultant and otherwise quite vanilla applicant, just like every other consultant. But and on top of that, they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do in their goals. So as part of the application process, obviously you have to work through your goals. We were able to dive into a specific story, a specific moment when they learned in an extracurricular activity that people learn differently. People integrate knowledge differently. And that became the campaign, if we want to call it that, of the entire application process. They too ended up at Wharton, and now they actually are doing the things that they wrote in their application that they were going to do. And not because the goal was unique or anything like that, but because it was anchored on something they actually intrinsically believed in, and it's a value they upheld. And now they have the ability to do that in the real world. Now, I'm not saying here that everyone is going to, go to business school and never change their mind, because that's not realistic. But being able to have that introspection about what matters to you will help you understand who you are. And then as you go to business school, as you will be offered so many different opportunities that you didn't think you need, that introspection will be really important in that moment, because it will help you discern, are you taking on this opportunity because it's cool, it's interesting, I've never done it before, or are you taking this opportunity because it actually aligns with who you are and what matters to you? And one of the biggest complaints, if we want to call it that, first world problem that I get from clients who are actually in business school that we continue to have conversations with is there's just so much to do that they have a really hard time fitting everything in their schedule. So you have to be discerning. But how can you be discerning if you haven't reflected in your own value system and your value base?
So I know that there are tons of folks listening who are mid-application, who have spent the better part of this year already studying, writing essays, getting letters of recommendation, the whole kit and caboodle. But if they haven't had the right guidance about introspection or finding their authentic story, where do you think they should begin to make their application reflect some of that soul, if you will?
Applicants, when they sit to write their application, oftentimes think, okay, I have to write essays, I have to have a resume, and I have to submit my application. That's the extent to where they think about until they actually submit, and then they realize there's so much more. But let's just stick to the beginning part. And they think of business school as, what is the rank of the school and what's going to make me look best? Before you go into any school preparation, anything of selecting your schools, the first thing we do here at Sia is we have applicants go to define their goals. And we follow essentially what Simon Sinek talks about, which is start with your why. Why it is that you are going on this journey. What is the final outcome in the best case scenario that you can imagine today of who you are today, that you can imagine that future? What is it you're doing it for? So some people talk about, oh, I want to work in, the energy space. Okay, great. Many people want to work in the energy space. Why do you want to work in the energy space? What is the problem that you see in the market that is moving you to be a catalyst in that space to make the change, right? So that first why are you doing this, right? It's really important to define for yourself. And that has to go back to your stories and experiences that you've had, right? It has to be anchored on your own experiences, in your own, like, what did you see in the world, whether you've had professional exposure to it or personal exposure to it, right? So I had a client who essentially ended up going to Wharton's healthcare management program. And if anyone here is in the healthcare space knows that even though Wharton has a class of about 900 students, the healthcare management program, which you have to apply to specifically, only admits about 70 students. So the competition is even more fierce than applying to Wharton to get into this program. This client's entire anchor, right? If we look at his career, essentially, he went from working in the creative field, right? He was a writer, essentially. Then he said, no, I want to learn technology. So he ended up working in technology field. And then he had an experience working for Uber, that because he was essentially a country manager for Uber, he saw how people had a hard time getting a car in the middle of the night. Now he was working in the African continent, and how people were having a hard time getting car services at nighttime when they needed to go to the hospital. That was the experience that led him on the journey to healthcare, that he ended up going and working for the hospital. And then the entire mission that he has is to essentially revolutionize healthcare in the African continent. But that experience alone is the anchor point of what led him on this journey. And you have to start with your why. If you want to have a compelling, authentic story, you have to start with your why, because you want the reader reading it to believe in your conviction, and you want them to want to help you get there, right? So your why is always a really, really important key. Then, of course, you're going to be taking that and applying it to the rest of the application. How do you have transferable skills? You don't currently have the experiences you need to get to lead technology or whatever it is that you want to do. You then need to say, okay, but while I'm not there yet, here are the skills that I have. Here are the experiences that I have that are transferable to that future. And one of the other mistakes that applicants make initially is that they think that, business school is the end all be all. Like if I get into Harvard, if I get into Wharton, it's going to be the place that, it's going to solve all my problems. It won't, right? It is a place that will give you tools if you choose to leverage them. That applies to across all schools. So when you're thinking about your application, it's not about the school, it's about your goals. It's about what you want to do and the school being a supporter of you on that journey. But when it comes to experiences, so not everything is about goals in the application. Some of the areas that you should be thinking about is what are the experiences I am most proud of, right? And don't just say one, list at least 3. And they can be across your professional, extracurricular. Then you want to look at the experiences where you have learned most from. Where do we learn most from? When there's tension, when there's problems, when there is moments when everything feels like it's going to fall apart. Those are vulnerable moments that you've had where you had the choice to say, okay, this is not going to work. I'm going to sort of wash my hands and just let it go. Or I'm actually going to be what Carol Dweck calls the growth-minded person who's going to figure things out. Everything is solvable if you have enough conviction and if you have enough stamina and resilience to keep on going, right? And trying new things, right? Not doing it the same way. What are some of the experiences that have been most challenging for you? What are those moments? Identify them specifically. More importantly, also, is we are a product of our entire ecosystem that we are a part of. So your childhood does serve a purpose in your MBA application. What did you learn in your childhood? What are some of those fond memories that you think now or you still think about from your childhood that make you smile? What have they taught you? Why are they important to you? Because those are value experiences that tell us, how do you think? You're not going to necessarily take that childhood story, you spending your time with your grandfather on the couch and your grandfather telling you stories. That is not going to go in your application. But what's going to go in the application is you feeling as part of a collective community, you feeling a part of a collective story. And that part can go in your application. And then once you reflect on these, and of course, you're going to have more examples, then you're going to start thinking about what is the value of these experiences. We have a tendency to skip to the end. There's a lot of people who take a book, read the beginning and read the end, and they're skip the entire journey of how they got there. We cannot be that in our own storytelling, application process. We need to think and evaluate what is the value of these experiences? What did you learn from them? But then also, how did this story show me at my best and also at my worst, right? Then when you take it a step further from there, once you reflected on who you are, because all of this is to tell you who you are, then your job is to say, so what? So what? Why should the business school care about this? And now you have to imagine yourself in the future that you want to be, near future, which is the MBA classroom. What are others going to take from the experiences that you've had that will enable them to learn? And when you think about a business school, they want unique stories. So your job is to dive deeper into your stories and be able to communicate a value that others may not do. And that's essentially how you introspect in a nutshell.
The thing that I'm thinking at this moment is, yes, absolutely. You have to dig deep. You have to unearth those kernels of truth and those moments that, if your life were a movie or a book, that those would be in the montage before the story begins, like the most important things. It's your origin story, if I can sort of leverage my love of superheroes. But when you're doing an application, you have a limited amount of time or word count to tell these stories. So how do you strike the right balance between being authentic and sharing yourself and being polished and professional?
Yeah. So I think that's a really important balance. One of the things I tell our clients, and we tell our clients, is you have to do a lot of the legwork before you present a polished 500-word response. When you think about, and I'm not saying that people are sitting here and watching this and thinking, oh, I want to be a New York Times bestseller. But if you think about those books that make it to a bestseller list that are published, that final product that looks so simple, so flawless, so easy to understand. You're not sitting there confused about what is the author trying to tell me. If you think about those, they had actually had to come through a lot of reflection. That's like a year in the making, 2 years in the making, and sometimes even more in the making. Now, you're of course not going to sit here and tell your story for 1 year trying to figure out what story to tell. I always like to think of storytelling as one, you have to, especially in business school application, you have to anchor it on what are you being asked. But that does not preclude you from actually sprinkling a little bit of personality, a little bit of background that will be able to tell a much more dynamic character than just a two-dimensional person who's just answering the question. Now, of course, that's not going to come as a first draft. It is always a process of answer the question first, sprinkle in the details, and then trim and be more concise. So there are many iterations to a draft. And it's not just, oh, how am I going to make it more polished? It's about how do I have a strong foundation? If we think about it from the prospect of building a house, you need the foundation. In this case, would be answering the question. Then, okay, how do you want the house to look? How colorful is it going to be? How complicated is it going to be? How tall is it going to be? It is totally up to you in terms of how you determine where those other elements play an important role in that storytelling.
So I think I maybe know the answer to this last question I have for you. But if there's one piece of advice you'd want every MBA applicant listening or watching to know, to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
The biggest piece of advice is don't outsource your voice. It's so important. This is a catalyst moment for your career. A business school should never be thought of as the job that I get immediately after. It should be thought of the community I'm going to be a part of for the rest of my life that will help me make pivots and moves and enable me to get to where I want to go professionally for as long as I choose to be active in the world. And if you think of it that way, how important is for you to do this right and go on this journey in an authentic way? Um, and leveraging AI is great. It's a great tool, but don't let it tell your story. You are the master of your storytelling. So be fully present there.
Where else can folks learn more about you and what you do if they want to do some soul searching with Sia Admissions?
Absolutely. The easiest way to learn more about our process is to go to our website, siaadmissions.com. We talk about our process. You can look at our team, what we do. You can look at our past clients, so you can dive deep. And we also have school-specific deep dives. Right now, we only have the M7s, which a lot of people are interested in. So we go very deeply into how to tell those stories, how to prepare for interviews, how to guide your recommender.
That's it for today's episode of Inside the GMAT. Thank you again, Susan Berishaj, for joining us and reminding us that while AI may have a place in the application process, the most powerful differentiator is knowing yourself. If you'd like to learn more about Susan and her work, as she mentioned, you can visit her at siaadmissions.com. We'll also have all of these links in the show notes. And if you're preparing for your MBA journey, remember that MBA.com is your go-to resource for official GMAT prep, other free tools, and guidance from, of course, GMAC, the makers of the GMAT exam. If you've enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow Inside the GMAT wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you don't miss future episodes. Inside the GMAT is brought to you by GMAC. I'm GMAC Zach, and until next time.